Hey YouTube, Tyler again here to talk about things going on in the world around us. This time one of my many film reviews. But first, update for you. Yep, got married and very happy. Had a wonderful ceremony. And just got back from my honeymoon this last weekend and totally still on island time. So, tired at work and everything. But back to the subject of the video, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the review. To put this up front, I was a huge fan of the first one, and I've been a fan of every Marvel Studios film that has come out thus far. I think they've all been great quality films, and I think everyone tends to hold Marvel films to a certain standard, and it makes it hard for people to really accept any sort of shortcoming within a Marvel Studio film. And I had some concerns when I heard mixed reviews for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I've heard people give it as low as a 4 out of 10. And I've heard people give it as high as 10 out of 10. I had to watch it twice, honestly, to give it an honest assessment, because the first time I watched it, I was a little disappointed. Because some of the magic we saw in the first film isn't necessarily there in the second one, and I'll get into that why in separate reasons. Spoiler alert for this review, but I'll enter that territory towards the tail end. Here's how I'm going to do it. What I liked, what I didn't like, and then spoiler stuff and how it connects to the rest of the Marvel Universe. First and foremost, what I liked. It was very funny. I feel like Marvel Studios is finally like, you know what, let's make it straight up comic book. Let's not even hold back. Let's just make it as funny as possible. And let's just have a loose story. And it worked. It worked out nicely. They left a lot of time for jokes, and it's great for a full theater, but if you watch it alone, those jokes might not be as strong. I'll just say it that way. It was funnier than the first film, which is hard to believe, but because we have already seen the first film, we know what to expect. What else worked? Character development. Each of the characters developed in different ways. And it took me watching it the second time to really realize that every single Guardian in this feature, except for maybe Drax, really develop. Each of them have arcs that close or arcs that end, and it works out nicely. It's almost like James Gunn intentionally broke up the cast within the movie. They went on different separate journeys in order for each character to grow in their own way. It worked out awesomely. So when you're going into this feature, think of each character having their own story within this story of the movie. So examine each character individually and watch how they change from the beginning to the end of the movie. And it was nice, and that includes the extension of the Guardians, like Yondu and Nebula. They had arcs as well. What else worked nicely? The music, once again, works out nicely. A little different than the first film, a little less playful, but there is a track in the feature which you hear in the very beginning of the movie, which sort of sets the tone for the theme throughout, and I thought that was a nice touch. I like so much in this movie. There were so many moments, and overall you leave the film like, oh, I can't wait for the next one, and let's get to Infinity War already. But there were some things I didn't like. As I mentioned, it is a loose story. It's a very straightforward story, and it's not a deep story. And when the movie's over, it almost feels like, oh, I want more story, because it is entirely character focused and less of an arc focus, and surprisingly loosely connected to the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, considering you have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, which explained Thanos, and now we have Thanos again, but not in the movie. Yeah, spoiler, Thanos isn't in this movie, but he is referred to a lot by the characters. So I could have used a little bit more story, but I understand why, because Gunn intended to develop the characters rather than move the story along. And I'll leave this nebulous now, but there were arcs that definitely ended for Peter Quill, which you could see in the trailer, but that pretty much carries this story, that story that was left open at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. There wasn't much other than that I didn't dislike, or much that I disliked, but I will say if the movie had an extra 10 minutes, it would have definitely benefited, because to get from the second to the third act is very abrupt, and it's an amazing third act, but you have to go back and watch again to kind of understand how everything unfolded so quickly, and an extra 10 minutes of development between, I'll just say, Peter Quill and Ego would have definitely benefited this feature. And lastly, in the spoiler territory, how this all connects to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. First and foremost, spoiler alert, so if you're watching this and haven't seen the movie yet, watch the movie. I'm going to ruin some things for you, and you're going to hate me for doing it. So cut away now if you don't want the movie to be ruined. But Yondu, so again, I mentioned pairings earlier, so we have Peter Quill was paired with Ego, Nebula was paired with Gamora, Drax was paired with Mantis, and now we have Rocket paired with Yondu, and Groot, but Groot was not really a character because he's an infant in mind. But through these pairings, they developed each of the characters separately. So I'll just go through these. I'll make these duo kind of explanations. With Yondu developed Rocket and Peter Quill in ways that, in my opinion, were the best in the film. And sadly, Yondu had to die, had to be the first real death in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that anyone actually cares about. Yondu was the best character in the movie. In my opinion, the most developed character in the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise through this feature. And he only wanted to really make Rocket open up. And at the end of the movie, it really shows that by Rocket's tear. And that actually, if you look at it from Yondu's point of view and you watch Guardians 1 again, you realize how essential Yondu is to this role. I hate that they killed him, but I understand they had to. Yondu was actually the very first the leader of the first Guardians of the Galaxy team, and it's just frustrating. It had to happen, but I respect James Gunn for having the courage to do that. Next pairing, Nebula and Gamora. Nebula's arc ends because Nebula finally opens up and is finally not just a psychopath, but it explains why she's a psychopath, and explains why she makes the decisions she has made throughout the film. And at the end of the feature, instead of being an nemesis to them, she is more of an ally who is not on the same team, rather than someone with similar goals. And that worked out nicely. Just the Nebula saving Gamora is her arc ending, and Gamora giving Nebula a hug at the end is her arc ending, with the butting heads between the two sisters. Next pairing, this one, development isn't really there. Drax and Mantis. You get to see Drax open up a bit about his feelings, and that was nice. It was a nice refresher. But it would have been nice to see a little bit more development there. And lastly, Peter Quill, Star-Lord, and Ego. Marvel Cinematic Universe wise, Ego is not Peter Quill's dad in the comics. Peter Quill's dad is Jason, king of the Spartax. Spartax are always at war with Asgard. I was hoping they'd go that route, because Asgard, it would have been an obvious connection from Guardians to Asgard, especially considering End of Thor 2 brought them to the Collector in the first place, so it'd be nice to bring him back. But Ego, spoiler alert, is the villain. ended up being he's just planting seeds across the universe and looking for someone to charge the battery for what he wants to spread across the universe. And we all know this if you're reading the comics, but Peter Quill has celestial, or has some sort of magic connection to celestial stuff or whatever. And it was explained nicely by being Ego's son and having the only DNA thing. And that was a heart-wrenching moment. If you saw the movie, which I hope you did, if you're watching this still, when Ego tells Peter that he killed his mom, and he then proceeds to break the Walkman, which was playing the song in the beginning, and yeah, that was a strong moment, and I think if it weren't for that moment, the movie would be much weaker. So as far as development goes, again, my only complaint was the abruptness from the transition from the second act to the third act, because Ego was just like, all of a sudden, here's my master plan, you're my slave now, or whatever, and it was just like, well, that was quick. Wait, you're saying within 10 minutes, Peter Quill went from hating his dad to loving his dad to being like, oh shit, my dad's a super villain. What the heck? And I also would have liked to see a little bit more development between Yondu and Peter. But it was a nice reveal at the end for like Yondu to sacrifice himself to save Peter. Overall, get into ratings because we're already past 10 minutes. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I would rate it as an average Marvel Studios movie. Story-wise, it's kind of the weakest because it's a very basic story, but jokes-wise, this is probably the funniest Marvel Studios movie. I would probably rate this around Ant-Man level, which isn't an insult. But again, the standards are so high now for Marvel Studios movie. You know, you have to have a stronger story than you had in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 in order for them to really live up to expectations. There's a bet going around. Is this going to make $1 billion? Because Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 didn't make $1 billion, and Marvel seems to be putting more into the marketing for this one. I don't know if it's going to make $1 billion. It might get close. I hope it makes more than Batman v Superman because it deserves to, but you know, one can only hope. I think it's going to make around the same amount of money Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 did. As far as connections to the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because I did forget to touch on this, how is this connected? Really, the only two things that really happen in the future which move the story, well, three things that move the story forward. Nebula is now no longer a villain and is going to go kill Thanos, try to kill him herself. 2, we have Sylvester Stallone's character and that old team back together, which that was another complaint I forgot to mention, but you know, it's not detrimental to the story. And lastly, at the very end, in the end credit scene, we have the, what are they called? The Gold People? I forget. But they may, at the end of the future, you find out they're making Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock is like the glue to the Infinity Gauntlet storyline and the Infinity War storyline. So if you read those comics, you know he's essential to the story in the Infinity War. So what the heck? And I thought Guardians 3 wasn't coming out until after Infinity War Part 1. So how the heck is Marvel going to do that? I hope that, like, what I really hope now is to just officially close this out, is things aren't, like, super rushed moving forward between Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Infinity War. I hope it doesn't just get all crammed together. Because that would be a little disappointing, because you've slow cooked it for so long. Don't ruin it now by just speeding up the process. I really hope everything maintains pace